Have you noticed how quickly outrage spreads these days? One headline, one viral post, and suddenly entire groups are labeled, condemned, and dismissed. But what if this self-righteous anger isn't actually helping anyone, least of all ourselves? Well, in this episode, I'm going to explore the psychology, the religion, and the politics behind outrage, and why it feels so irresistible, and dare I say, even delicious, and what it really takes to step out of the spiral and create meaningful change. Hi everyone, you're listening to the Light Journal Podcast. I'm Jamie Perez. There's something I keep noticing in the world around me, and maybe you've noticed it too. It feels like everyone is just one headline or one podcast title or one viral image away from erupting into outrage. The accusations fly fast. The labeling begins, and almost instantly, entire groups of people get written off as evil, ignorant, or dangerous. And I can't help but ask, why? Why are we experiencing all this self-righteous anger? Why are we so quick to condemn everyone? Why do we pounce on the smallest shred of evidence, and sometimes none at all, to validate our indignation? It seems like anger has become our first and only language. The world spins downward and our response is outrage. And let's be honest, anger does feel powerful. It gives us an adrenaline boost that makes us feel alive, righteous, and maybe even a little bit invincible. And yet, that power is only temporary. So what if instead of creating change, it just feeds the very spiral that we want to stop? I want to take a closer look at that spiral. So why does outrage feel so irresistible? Well, when we look at psychology, it has a few answers. Research shows that moral outrage triggers a rush of adrenaline and dopamine, and it gives us this literal high. That surge makes us feel alive, energized, righteous, like we're doing something really important. Outrage also bonds us to a group. When we post an angry reaction online, people who agree with us, they just rush right in to put their likes and affirm that they're with us, right? So we feel less alone, more certain, more validated. It's addictive. In fact, psychologists now have a name for it, and they call it outrage porn. Isn't that crazy? It's the way we consume and share content that provokes anger just for the rush it brings. But yeah, sure, it may feel powerful for a moment, but outrage rarely leads to meaningful action. Instead, it just leads to burnout, cynicism, and even depression. It gives us the illusion of doing something, but it doesn't change anything. Outrage is performative more than transformative. And that, I think, is part of the deeper pattern. Outrage often masks a feeling of powerlessness. It gives us, borrowed strength, a borrowed fire, something that distracts us from the harder questions like, what role am I playing in the spiral? What within me is asking to be seen, healed, or transformed? Put your own question there. Why do you feel the need to be angry or outraged by the things that you see happening around you? What rush does it give you? How does it benefit you? There is, I think, another reason why we rush into self-righteous indignation. I think deep down many of us feel powerless. So it's easier to point at others than to look inside and address the fact that we do feel powerless. It's easier to blame others than to ask what's happening inside us, inside me. As long as I can say, I'm unhappy because of what so-and-so did, or because of what this group believes, or because of what they're destroying in the world, then I don't have to take responsibility, especially not for my own unhappiness. Outrage allows us to justify our fears, our anger, our sense of powerlessness by projecting it outward. And as long as we're looking outside ourselves, we can avoid the harder truths that maybe, just maybe, we're the ones creating our own reality, our own experiences. Yeah, that's uncomfortable. I mean, it's much easier to see ourselves as victims of others than to face the possibility that change begins within us. That transformation isn't out there, it's in here. Outrage lets us feel powerful, if only for a moment. But it is borrowed power. The adrenaline's going to fade. That post you wrote, it's going to lose traction. The applause is going to quiet down. And all that validation that was giving you that rush and that high, it's going to fade away. And then you're just going to be left with the same emptiness inside that you had to begin with, which is why the cycle just keeps repeating itself. More outrage, more projection, more labeling. It's not just culture, it's a personal pursuit of validation, of feeling powerful. But what if we broke that cycle? What if instead of fueling outrage outward, we actually turned inside and looked inside and asked, where am I avoiding my own responsibilities? Where am I projecting? What within me needs to be healed? Religion has a complicated relationship with outrage. Christianity, for example, uses the image of Jesus flipping the tables in the temples as evidence that righteous anger is holy. And sometimes anger is just a response to injustice. I mean, it does signal that something in the world is out of balance. But the deeper teachings of Jesus and of most spiritual traditions warn against self-righteousness. The Sermon on the Mount, for example, calls us to be peacemakers, to love our enemies, to forgive 70 times 7. Jesus reserved his harshest words not for the sinners, but for the Pharisees. And those were people who were convinced of their own moral superiority. Other traditions echo this. I mean, look at Buddhism. It calls anger one of the 3 poisons of the mind, claiming that it clouds our clarity and our compassion. Taoism warns against forcing outcomes or clinging to extremes because imbalance, well, it breeds collapse. So religions do affirm that anger can illuminate justice, but it also insists at the same time that self-righteousness blinds us to the truth. I can't help think of the saying of Jesus where he mentioned that, why are you judging the person who has a splinter in their eye when you have a log in your own? It blinds us. So anger might open our eyes to something that needs to be addressed, but when it comes right down to it, only compassion can actually heal it. This danger escalates when outrage wears the cloak of a religion. When people use sacred texts or spiritual authority to justify their actions, well, it takes on an absolutist quality that can excuse almost anything. If God said it, or if we believe God said it, then who can question us? If our interpretation of Scripture is seen as the only truth with a capital T, then everyone else is automatically deceived, blind, or rebellious. Once we convince ourselves that we're not just right, but divinely right, the door to real communication, it slams shut and a lock is put on that door. There's no way of getting through. Because at that point, we're no longer interacting with another human being. We're confronting somebody we've already written off as lost, or even labeled as an enemy of God. History is full of what happens then. People who felt called by God used that conviction to colonize, to enslave, to silence, to shame, to kill. I mean, any atrocity can be justified if you stamp it with divine approval. And that's the terrifying power of self-righteousness wrapped in religion. It becomes untouchable. And if you've ever been on the receiving end of this kind of religious outrage, you know how powerless it makes you feel. There's no communicating with someone who thinks they've got heaven on their side. When politics are involved, outrage isn't an accident. It's a strategy. Anger mobilizes voters, energizes donors, and keeps people glued to the television screen. I mean, politicians and media outlets have learned that nothing drives engagement like a good enemy. That's why we get phrases like axis of evil or the basket of deplorables, because they stick in our mind and they're easy. I mean, it's also seen in the way that we use terms like woke or liberal, not as descriptors, but as slurs. I mean, if you decide to label somebody as woke, well, you're putting them in this category that allows you to just dismiss them as a whole. Nothing they say from that point on is worthy of your consideration. Label them liberal, and the word becomes shorthand for things that you associate with it, maybe naive, weak, or anti-American. And the same happens on the other side. I mean, when people are labeled as fascists, bigots, or MAGA, all communication gets shut down. We're not talking anymore, we're just screaming at each other. Labeling in politics isn't sloppy. It's deliberate. It divides the world into good guys, bad guys, heroes, and villains. And you know, that clarity is a lie, but it's effective. People rally behind simple stories even when the reality is much more complicated. And this is where it even gets more potent. When politics seizes religion, then outrage becomes unstoppable. History shows us that religion all by itself influences hearts and communities. But when political power hijacks a faith, it transforms it into a machine, into a weapon for mobilization and control. Leaders know that faith taps into our deepest sense of identity, of belonging, of purpose. So policies that are wrapped up in sacred language allows wars to become holy, laws to become God-ordained, enemies to be painted as demonic or deceived. Suddenly, if you want to question a policy, it's the same as questioning God itself. We've seen this play out so many times through history. Crusades, colonization, slavery justified by Bible verses, and more recently, political campaigns framed as literal battles between good and evil. Religion is just a moral cover. Politics is where the real power lies. But together, when they merge together, it's very effective at silencing dissent and reducing complex issues into black and white ultimatums. I mean, it's happening today. Entire voting blocks are courted not through a nuanced policy discussion, but by appealing to religious identity. Leaders proclaim that God is on our side, as though the divine is a campaign strategist. When we hand our spiritual discernment over to political powers, we become pawns in someone else's game, and I guarantee you we're not as good at playing it as they are. This union of politics and religion doesn't just distort faith, it destroys communication. Once politics baptizes an idea, it's no longer something that's up for debate. It's an absolute truth. And anyone who questions it, they're not just your political opponent, they're enemies of God. Outrage politics has a cost. It polarizes us so deeply that compromise becomes impossible. Dialogue shuts down before it even begins. And the system feeds on our fury while leaving the deeper problems of our society unsolved. And at the very heart of the problem lies something so incredibly, deceptively simple. Labels. Now, you know, I've talked about this in other podcasts, but it really needs to be addressed again. We are quick, far too quick, to categorize people, whether we're categorizing them as evil, ignorant, brainwashed, or beyond saving. Labels are shortcuts that spare us the hard work of wrestling with someone else's genuine humanity. But that convenience comes at a cost. Labels also dehumanize. Once the complexity of a person is flattened into a category, we don't have to listen to their story. We don't have to pay attention to their pain. We don't have to know anything about them because we've made them into a caricature. And in so doing, we shut the door to understanding, to dialogue and connection. But don't we all really want the same basic things? Food on the table, safety for our families, homes to return to, dignity, belonging, and the chance to live a meaningful life. But when we reduce others to evil or woke or liberal, we forget that beneath the label is a human being striving for many of the same things that we do. Yet we're stopping the conversation before it ever begins by putting a label on them. There is an alternative. Think about the way that Jesus interacted with those society had already labeled and dismissed. Tax collectors, Samaritans, prostitutes. But you know what? He refused to let those labels dictate his relationship with them because he saw people as people, not as labels and categories. And that then becomes the invitation for us today to resist the shortcut of labeling and to step into curiosity instead of certainty, and to recognize the divine in others before we launch into judgment. What happens when we cling to labels is we don't just shut the door to others, we're also silencing ourselves because we're losing the chance to learn, to grow, to influence, and even to heal the spiral that keeps feeding us with all this outrage. And don't forget, in our outrage economy, anything can be used as justification. For example, in 2019, I think it was, there was the story of the Covington Catholic students that were on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial. And there's a short video clip that made it look like a group of boys in MAGA hats were aggressively taunting a native elder. Man, did that cause outrage. It spread like wildfire. People were demanding somebody gets punished. So careers were being threatened. I mean, entire groups were being condemned. But when the full video came out, that story was a lot different than what that short little clip indicated. It's a window into how easily our emotions can be hijacked. A soundbite, a meme, a headline ripped out of context, and suddenly we're certain we know the whole truth because propaganda thrives on its simple, emotional, and easy to spread lies. I mean, we all know lies travel a lot faster than truth because they're usually packaged for maximum outrage. And once something confirms the story we already have decided we're going to believe, what do? We grab it, we share it, we wield it, often without realizing we're complicit in spreading the lie. We may feel righteous, justified, and powerful, but in reality, we're often participating in the very spiral of anger, projection, and division that we think we're fighting against. So if outrage and labeling feed that downward spiral, what can we actually do? Well, I suggest it starts with identifying what we're celebrating and rewarding in our society. Right now, we cheer all those gotcha moments, the viral takedowns, the snarky clapbacks. We elevate those who destroy their opponents in a debate, rather than those who listen, hopefully with some humility. But what if we flipped the script? I mean, what if we celebrated bridge building more than dunking, or rewarded curiosity instead of certainty, or honored those who humanize their opponents instead of vilifying them? We need a cultural shift in what gets applause. Instead of applauding those who tear down, why not applaud those who are lifting up? Instead of applauding those who score points against their opponent, what if we emphasize instead seeking truth? What if we moved away from verbal sparring to real, genuine dialogue? This is where Christian nationalism, and really any ideology built on coercion, kind of enters into the conversation. At its core, it assumes change can be imposed from the outside. That if you legislate morality, if you restrict people's freedoms, if you enforce conformity, that somehow you're going to be able to save the culture. But you know what? It doesn't work that way. The tenets of these type of ideologies often include things like restoring biblical authority in the law, or privileging certain versions of Christianity in public life, or marginalizing, possibly even criminalizing, those who don't conform to traditional gender roles and sexual behaviors, and to restricting reproductive freedoms and maintaining patriarchal family structures. But force never works for long. History is full of examples of empires, theocracies, authoritarian regimes. They all collapse under their own rigidity. The Puritan theocracy in early America crumbled. The Soviet Union collapsed. Even Rome fell. Structures built on coercion always implode. True change can't be forced. It must be chosen. It must arise from within. So then this is the question that really matters. If indignant self-righteousness doesn't bring change, if labeling and outrage deepen the downward spiral, if force always fails, then what are we to do? We return to the heart. Change begins when we are quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to anger. It begins when we see the divine spirit in the person we are tempted to label, when we refuse to let adrenaline dictate our response, when we choose compassion over condemnation. That doesn't mean abandoning anger altogether. Anger does have a place because it serves like the spark that tells us that something is wrong. But the spark is not the fire. The fuel must be love, humility, wisdom. Otherwise, we're just feeding the very blaze that's burning us all down. So maybe the real question isn't how do we stop the spiral, but how do we step out of it? That spiral, it's just going to keep spinning as long as we keep feeding it. Every time we share outrage just because of the rush of it, every time we label someone as evil and shut down conversations, every time we chase the applause of those who agree with our side instead of seeking truth. We're making that spiral spin faster. At this time in human history, we are being called to step out of the spiral. So we need to pause. We need to choose to listen. We need to resist the easy labels. We need to honor the humanity of those that we disagree with, to choose another way of being, to live from our hearts, to choose unity and connectedness, to invite and welcome. When we embody those changes, that's going to change the world. If this message has resonated with you, be sure to like and subscribe. And if you want to be notified when new episodes drop, be sure to click on the bell icon. But this is what I want to leave you with. I see you for who you are, what you are, and how you serve. Thanks for listening. I'm Jamie Perez with the Light Journal Podcast. Blessings on your journey, everyone.